I wasted 5 years of my life, 5 years waiting for the perfect moment, 5 years preparing, planning, overthinking every single detail. And you know what I have to show for it? Regret. Let me tell you something that nobody wants to hear. While you're waiting to feel ready, someone else is already winning. They're not smarter than you. They're not more talented. They're just moving. I used to think success was about having all the answers before I started. I'd tell myself, just one more course, just one more book, just a little more research. But here's what I learned the hard way. Knowledge without action is just entertainment. You see, I had this dream, a big, beautiful dream that kept me up at night. But instead of chasing it, I kept refining it. I kept waiting for circumstances to be perfect. I kept waiting to feel confident enough, prepared enough, good enough. 5 years. Do you know how much can change in 5 years? Everything. But for me, nothing changed. Because I didn't change. I stayed in my comfort zone, convincing myself that I was being smart, being careful, being responsible. Meanwhile, people who started with less than me were building empires. People who knew less than me were making impact. People who were more afraid than me were living their dreams. And the worst part? They weren't lucky. They weren't special. They just understood something I didn't. Imperfect action beats perfect inaction every single time. I remember the exact moment everything shifted for me. I was scrolling through social media, seeing another person celebrate a milestone I had dreamed about. And instead of feeling inspired, I felt sick, because I realized I had been dreaming about this exact thing for 3 years. They had been doing it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the time I'd lost, all the opportunities that had passed me by, all the versions of success I could have achieved if I had just started. But here's where the story gets interesting, because that painful realization became the catalyst for everything that came after. The next morning, I made a decision. No more waiting, no more perfect plans, no more someday. I was going to start with what I had, where I was, right now. And let me be honest with you. It was messy. It was uncomfortable. It was nothing like the polished vision I had spent years perfecting in my head. But it was real. And real beats perfect every single day of the week. Within the first month, I learned more than I had in the previous 5 years combined. Not from courses, not from books. From doing, from failing, from adjusting, from trying again. I made mistakes, lots of them. I stumbled. I looked foolish. I had moments where I wanted to quit and go back to my comfortable planning phase. But something had changed in me. I had tasted progress, real progress. And once you taste that, you can't go back to just dreaming. Here's what nobody tells you about taking action. It creates clarity. All those questions you have, all those what-ifs, all those concerns about whether you're ready, they get answered when you move, not before. When you're stuck in planning mode, everything seems equally important and equally impossible. But when you start doing, priorities reveal themselves. The path forward becomes clear, not because you figured it all out, but because you started walking. Let me give you an example. I spent 6 months trying to decide on the perfect brand name. 6 months. I researched, I brainstormed, I asked for opinions, I changed my mind weekly. You know how long it took me to change my brand name later when I realized it wasn't working? One day. Because when you're in motion, decisions become easier. You're not paralyzed by hypotheticals anymore. You're dealing with reality. And here's the thing about reality. It's actually less scary than the stories we tell ourselves. I had built up this narrative in my head about all the things that could go wrong. What if I fail? What if people judge me? What if I'm not good enough? What if I waste my time and money? But when I actually started, most of those fears never materialized. And the ones that did, I handled them. Because humans are remarkably adaptable when we're actually in the game instead of on the sidelines. You know what's funny? The skills I thought I needed before starting, half of them were irrelevant. And the skills I actually needed, I couldn't have learned them from a course anyway. I had to develop them in the field. There's a massive difference between theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom. Theoretical knowledge is what you learn from books and videos. It's useful, don't get me wrong, but practical wisdom, that only comes from experience, from trying, from failing, from adjusting, from trying again. I see so many people making the same mistake I made. They're collecting knowledge like it's going to save them. They're waiting to feel confident before they start. But confidence doesn't come before action. Confidence is the result of action. Every single person you admire, every single success story you look up to, they all felt unready when they started. The difference is, they started anyway. They didn't wait for fear to disappear. They acted in spite of it. And here's a secret. Fear never completely goes away. Even now, when I'm doing things I've done 100 times before, there's still that little voice of doubt. But I've learned that fear and excitement feel remarkably similar in the body. Same elevated heart rate, same heightened awareness, same energy. The only difference is the story you tell yourself about what you're feeling. So when I feel that sensation now, instead of calling it fear and backing away, I call it excitement and move forward. It's the same feeling, different interpretation, different result. Now let me address something important. I'm not saying planning is bad. I'm not saying you should be reckless. Strategy matters. Preparation matters. But there's a point where preparation becomes procrastination. And most people cross that line without even realizing it. How do you know when you've crossed it? Ask yourself this: am I learning something new, or am I reviewing what I already know? Am I preparing for action, or am I avoiding action? Am I gathering necessary information, or am I seeking false security? Be honest with yourself. Because the comfortable lie of endless preparation will steal your dreams faster than any failure ever could. Here's what I wish someone had told me 5 years ago. You don't need to see the whole staircase to take the first step. You don't need to have it all figured out to begin. You don't need to be fearless to be brave. You just need to start. Start small if you need to. Start scared if you have to. Start imperfectly. Just start. Because the version of you that's capable of achieving your biggest dreams, that person doesn't exist yet. That person gets created through action, through challenges, through overcoming. Every time you do something that scares you, you become a slightly different person, a stronger person, a more capable person, a more confident person. But you can't think your way into being that person. You have to act your way into becoming them. Let me tell you about the compound effect of action. When you start taking consistent action, even small action, things begin to compound. You build momentum. You gain skills. You make connections. You create opportunities. But here's the thing about compound growth. It's invisible at first. For weeks, maybe months, it feels like nothing is happening. You're putting in effort, and seeing minimal results. This is where most people quit. They judge their 6 months of effort against someone else's 6 years of results and decide it's not working. But compound growth isn't linear. It's exponential, which means the beginning is always the slowest part. If you plant a bamboo seed, you water it every day for 5 years and see almost nothing, just a tiny shoot. But in the 6th year, that bamboo can grow 90 feet in 6 weeks. Was the growth all in the 6th year? No. It was happening underground for 5 years, building a root system strong enough to support rapid growth. Your efforts are never wasted, even when you can't see the results yet, even when it feels like nothing is happening. You're building your root system. And one day, if you keep showing up, if you keep taking action, if you refuse to quit, you'll experience growth that seems to come out of nowhere. But it didn't come from nowhere. It came from all those days you showed up when it felt pointless, all those moments you kept going when you wanted to quit, all those times you chose action over comfort. That's what I learned in the years after I finally started. Progress isn't always visible, but it's always happening when you're in motion. Now let me talk about failure, because that's the thing most people are actually afraid of, not the work itself, the possibility of failing. Here's what 5 years of overthinking taught me about failure. The failure you experience from trying is temporary and educational. The failure you experience from not trying is permanent and regretful. When you try and fail, you learn something. You adjust, you improve, you try again. When you don't try at all, you fail by default. And you learn nothing except how to be comfortable with unfulfilled potential. I've failed more times in the last few years than I did in the 5 years I spent planning. And you know what? I'm grateful for every single failure, because each one taught me something I needed to know. Each one made me better. Each one brought me closer to success. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of success. It's the tuition you pay for wisdom. And the people who succeed the most are simply the people who are willing to fail the most. They don't have some special failure-proof formula. They just have a different relationship with failure. They see it as feedback, not as a final verdict. So if you're afraid of failing, let me reframe it for you. You're going to fail anyway. Either you'll fail by trying and learning, or you'll fail by not trying and regretting. One of those failures moves you forward, the other keeps you stuck. Choose wisely. Here's another truth I learned. Perfectionism is just fear wearing a fancy mask. When you say you want everything to be perfect before you start, what you're really saying is you're afraid of being judged, afraid of criticism, afraid of not being good enough. And I get it. I really do. Because I lived in that fear for 5 years. But here's what I discovered. People are way too busy with their own lives to spend much time judging yours. And the ones who do judge, they're usually the ones not doing anything themselves. Critics sit in the cheap seats. Doers are in the arena. And you know what's beautiful about being in the arena? You stop caring so much about what people in the cheap seats think, because you're too busy actually doing the thing. When I finally started, I was terrified of what people would think. I imagined everyone watching, judging, criticizing, but in reality, most people didn't notice. And the ones who did? Most were supportive. Some were inspired. A few were critical. But their criticism said more about them than it did about me. And here's the thing about criticism. It only hurts when you secretly agree with it. When you're solid in your purpose, When you're committed to your path, other people's opinions become background noise. Not because you're arrogant, but because you're focused. You have work to do, dreams to build, a life to create. You don't have time to waste on people who aren't in the arena with you. So let me ask you something. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you start if you weren't afraid of judgment? What dream would you pursue if you trusted yourself completely? Now here's the real question. Why aren't you doing that right now? Because here's the truth. You can't fail at being yourself. You can't fail at pursuing what matters to you. You can only fail by not trying, by letting fear win, by choosing comfort over growth. And that's the failure you'll regret. Not the stumbles along the way, not the mistakes you make while trying, but the dream you never chased, the business you never started, the book you never wrote, the person you never became. That's the real failure, and it's completely avoidable. All you have to do is start. Look, I know this isn't easy to hear, especially if you've been preparing for months or years like I was. It feels like admitting that all that time was wasted. But it wasn't wasted if you learn from it. It wasn't wasted if it leads you to finally take action. Your past doesn't define your future unless you let it. Every moment is a chance to choose differently, to be different, to do different. And the beautiful thing about starting, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how much time you've already lost. It doesn't matter how far behind you think you are. Because the moment you start, you're ahead of everyone still waiting. You're lapping everyone still on the couch. You're winning against the version of yourself that does nothing. And that's the only competition that really matters. Not against other people. Against your own potential. Against your own excuses, against your own fears. Let me tell you what happened in my first year after I finally started. I made less money than I hoped. I worked harder than I expected. I failed more than I wanted to. But I also grew more than I ever imagined. I became someone I didn't recognize, someone stronger, someone braver, someone who doesn't quit when things get hard. And that person is worth more than any amount of planning could ever create, because that person was forged in action, tested by challenges, proven by persistence. That's who you become when you stop waiting and start doing. Not perfect, not fearless, not always successful, but real, alive, growing. And that's what life is actually about, not achieving some perfect outcome, but becoming someone capable of achieving. Not avoiding all mistakes, but learning from the ones you make. Not waiting for confidence, but building it through action. So here's my challenge to you. What's one thing you've been putting off? What's one dream you've been refining instead of pursuing? What's one fear that's been holding you back? Take action on it today. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when you feel ready. Today. It doesn't have to be a big action. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. Send that email. Make that call. Start that project. Take that first step. Because 5 years from now, you're going to arrive. The question is, where? Will you arrive having built something, having tried something, having become someone new? Or will you arrive having spent another 5 years preparing, planning, waiting for the perfect moment that never comes? The choice is yours. But I'm telling you from experience, action beats planning. Done beats perfect. Started beats ready. And the regret of trying and failing is nothing compared to the regret of never trying at all. Don't make the mistake I made. Don't waste your years in preparation. Don't let fear disguise itself as caution. Don't let perfectionism steal your dreams. Start now. Start messy. Start scared. Start small. Just start. Because your future self is counting on the decision you make today. And that future self doesn't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be brave enough to begin. The world doesn't need more people with perfect plans. It needs more people with the courage to execute imperfect ones. It needs people who stumble forward instead of standing still. It needs people who choose growth over comfort. It needs people like you, but only if you start. So what's it going to be? Another year of waiting? Another year of preparing? Another year of someday? Or is today the day everything changes? Is today the day you stop being a dreamer and start being a doer? Is today the day you stop planning your life and start living it? I hope so, because you deserve more than a life spent waiting. You deserve the adventure of trying, the growth of failing, the pride of persisting, the joy of becoming. But you only get that if you start. So start. Start right now. Start before you finish this video. Start before fear talks you out of it. Start before you convince yourself to wait just a little bit longer. Because here's the truth I learned after wasting 5 years. There is no perfect time. There is only now. And now is all you need. Your dreams are waiting. Your potential is waiting. Your future is waiting. Stop making them wait. Start.